The viewport stretched wide across the private chamber, framing the stars in cold silver fire. Lady Inera Nyx stood tall before it, her azure skin luminous against the glass, her snow-white hair pinned back with platinum combs. Every movement she made carried the weight of the Taurian elite, controlled, deliberate, rehearsed. Yet tonight her hands betrayed her. They traced the edges of a velvet pouch she had withdrawn from her vault, lingering over its soft surface before loosening the drawstrings to reveal what lay inside. 12 golden coins, ancient Terran relics, gleamed under the chamber's light. Each bore the faded stamp of a world that had once known no faster-than-light travel, no empire, no Taurian dominion. Worth a fortune to collectors, they represented something far more valuable to her: bait. She had reviewed his file a dozen times already. Hank Dunn, human, former special operations soldier of the Terran Defense Force. His record was decorated, his discharge classified. His scars suggested survival through circumstances that should have broken lesser beings. Inera's instincts whispered that he was dangerous. Dangerous could be useful, but only if controlled. And in her world, control meant leverage, and leverage meant testing. "My lady," came the voice of Villain, her steward, smooth as oiled silk through the chamber's calm. "The human awaits. Send him in," Inera replied. Her voice was cool, carrying the crisp accent of Taurian nobility. She straightened her emerald gown, its fur accents brushing her collarbones, and summoned the imperious bearing she wore. As easily as her jewels, the door slid open. Hank Dunn stepped inside, clad in dark Terran armor, functional and stripped of flourish. A pulse pistol rested at his hip. His eyes, sharp, gray, and predatory, scanned the chamber in a slow sweep. Before settling on her, he inclined his head, respectful without bowing, acknowledging her station while refusing to debase himself. "Lady Nyx," he said evenly. "Mr. Dunn." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I trust your journey was uneventful?" "As uneventful as pirate-infested space can be," he replied with a faint quirk of his scarred mouth. "Your escorts are efficient." She circled him slowly, measuring the tension in his posture, noting the way his eyes tracked her movement, while his awareness flickered toward exits, blind corners, potential ambush points. He moved like a predator, efficient, patient, dangerous. She allowed herself a small smile. "Your credentials are impressive. Yet I find it curious that a man of your talents would seek employment as a mere bodyguard. The private sector pays better than government work." His tone was dry, unapologetic. "And does it trouble you to serve a non-human employer?" she asked. "I've fought alongside Centrans, Proxians, and Taurians," he said evenly. "Species matters less to me than character." A diplomatic answer. Perhaps an honest one. Inera's eyes narrowed. Most beings, human or otherwise, wilted under her scrutiny. Dunn did not. "You understand that this position requires absolute loyalty. My business affairs are complex. Not all of them align with what others might consider legal." "I'm not hired as your moral compass, Lady Nyx," Dunn replied. "Just to keep you alive." She studied him for a long moment, then gestured to Villain waiting silently at the door. "My steward will show you to your quarters. You begin immediately." Dunn inclined his head again and turned to leave. "One more thing, Mr. Dunn," she called after him. He paused at the threshold, glancing over his shoulder. "Trust is earned in my household. Until you have mine, expect to be tested." His gray eyes gleamed faintly in the chamber's light. "I'd be disappointed if I wasn't." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the polished halls of her estate. When the doors sealed, Inera turned back to the velvet pouch upon her desk. The coins caught the light, golden symbols of temptation. Most of her previous guard strong, disciplined Taurian males had been predictable. This human was not. She needed to know what hid beneath that scarred composure. "Villain," she said softly into the cone. "Yes, my lady?" "Prepare the standard protocols. Surveillance, false. Alarms, the usual traps. And tonight," she let her blue fingers caress the coins, feeling their ancient weight, "place these in plain sight upon my desk. Make certain none notices them." "As you wish," Villain replied. Inera Nix's reflection stared back at her in the viewport glass, regal, beautiful, untouchable. Yet as the stars wheeled silently beyond, a whisper of unease stirred within her. She had hired a human bodyguard, and humans were anything but predictable. This test would reveal him, or break him. And either outcome, she told herself, would prove her right. But a voice she ignored, buried deep beneath the steel of her conviction, wondered what might happen if, for the first time, her test revealed something about herself instead. The following. Evening, the great halls of Inera's estate hummed with activity. A reception had been arranged for representatives from 3 trading houses. A parade of silken robes, jeweled headpieces, and carefully rehearsed courtesies. Musicians plucked delicate chords on stringed instruments that resonated like crystal. Wind chimes and trays of nectar wine passed between guests on the hands of servants trained never to speak. Inera moved among them like a queen in her domain, her snow-white hair gleaming beneath chandeliers of living light, her voice precise, cutting, and irresistible as she steered contracts and alliances into her orbit. Yet behind the flawless performance, her thoughts strayed again and again to the silent presence stationed outside her chambers. Hank Dundot, she had positioned him deliberately, away from the bustle of the reception. Guards stood in the hall, yes, but none at the door to her private study save the human. A risk or an opportunity, depending on perspective. The coins gleamed. Upon her desk, laid out with calculated carelessness. Ancient Terran artifacts, more than rare, more than valuable. They were temptation itself, waiting. From the corner of her eye, Inera saw Villain move like a shadow along the perimeter of the room, his discreet wrist console flashing updates. He caught her gaze for only an instant, lowering his head to signal that all preparations were in place. The surveillance grid was active. Hidden projectors mapped the human's every motion. Inera returned her attention to her guests, her smile sharp as glass as she parried a question on tariff shares. Still, she could not silence the quickened beat beneath her ribs. She had tested bodyguards before, but none had unsettled her as this one did. His scars, his calm, the way he carried himself with a predator's patience. It was as though he were measuring her even as she measured him. Halfway through the evening, as laughter and bargaining swirled around her, she triggered the alert. A subtle command, spoken into the pearl clasp at her collar, set the trap in motion. Somewhere in the East Wing, alarms chimed a staged disturbance. Her human protector could not ignore. She excused herself with the poise of a noblewoman and slipped into the hidden passages that wound like veins through her estate. Her pulse quickened with each step. When she reached the narrow corridor overlooking her chambers, she activated the holoslit. The air shimmered, resolving into the vision of her study door. There he was, standing tall, posture taut as a coiled spring. The alarm blinked on his wrist console. For a moment, he hesitated, eyes narrowing in suspicion. Then, with the precision of a man who trusted his instincts more than signals, he moved swiftly down the corridor and out of sight, entered her chamber from the hidden panel, and slipped behind the carved Taurian screen that faced her desk. The coins shone in the lamplight, a golden beacon. She crouched low, her breath controlled but quickened. Now the truth would surface. 7 minutes passed before Dunn returned. He scanned the hallway with a soldier's patience, then entered. His gaze flicked once to the corners of the room, lingering on the spaces where the surveillance eyes glimmered faintly in infrared. Then, without hesitation, he strode to the desk. Inara's fingers curled against the wood of the screen. This was it? He lifted the pouch. He opened it. Gold glittered against his scarred hands. For a breath, her triumph burned sharp, caught, but instead of slipping the treasure into his pocket, Dunn produced a small satchel from his armor. He placed the coins within and moved directly to her private safe. His hands danced across the console with practiced familiarity, entering the precise code that sealed it. The mechanism sighed, the vault opened, and he placed the pouch inside. The lock sealed again. He straightened, resumed his post at the door, as though nothing had occurred. Inara's throat tightened. He hadn't stolen a thing. He had secured them. Yet how had he known the combination? She rose, deliberately brushing the screen to announce herself. His head turned, eyes sharp and unreadable. "My lady," he said evenly, without flinch or guilt. "I thought you were still with your guests." "Clearly," she replied, stepping forward, her voice like ice. "What were you doing at my safe?" "Securing your property," he answered without hesitation. "You accessed my private vault without authorization. Your steward provided the code when I was hired," Dunn said, calm as ever. "Standard security protocol. Valuables are to be locked down if left exposed. And the coins?" She pressed. "Safer in your vault than on your desk during a reception with 50 strangers in the building." She searched his face for cracks, for deceit, for the twitch of an eye or the clench of a jaw. There was nothing. Only gray eyes that revealed nothing but conviction. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, sharp as a blade. Then Inara exhaled, turning away as though dismissing him. "Return to your post." He inclined his head once. "Yes, Lady Nyx." When he left, she stood staring at the vault, irritation tangled with intrigue. Every test so far, he had passed with infuriating ease. And tonight, instead of catching him in betrayal, she had glimpsed something more disquieting: judgment. His judgment, not hers. As the hum of the reception drifted faintly through the corridors, Lady Inara Nyx pressed her blue fingers against the cold surface of the safe and whispered to herself, "Exceptionally competent, or exceptionally cunning." The estate lay silent after the last of the guests departed, servants moving quietly to clear away the remnants of the lavish reception. Inara Nyx lingered in her private study, a taste of unease still sharp in her mouth. She had watched him take the coins, watched him secure them rather than steal them, and instead of relief, she felt something far more dangerous: uncertainty. For Taurian nobles, loyalty was a transaction. Every bond could be weighed, every pledge bought, every betrayal inevitable. That was the way of her people. Yet this human, with his scars and steady eyes, had stepped neatly beyond those rules. He had refused debate, refused the seduction of wealth, and in doing so, refused to be predictable. Sleep eluded her. At dawn, she summoned him. When Dunn entered her study, his armor was freshly polished, his dark cape bearing the insignia of her house, an unexpected concession to her culture. He stood at ease, but not relaxed, the way soldiers did when they knew relaxation could mean death. "You wanted to see me, Lady Nyx?" His voice was calm, patient, maddeningly self-contained. "Yes." She rose from her chair, emerald gown whispering across the polished floor as she circled the desk. "I find myself curious about something, Mr. Dunn. I'm at your disposal." His gray eyes tracked her movement, not with nervousness, but with an alertness that suggested he missed nothing. "You accessed my private vault last night?" "2. Secure valuables left exposed." "As you explained," she cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. "A commendable action, if that were truly your motivation." For the first time, a flicker crossed his face, something between annoyance and weary patience. "You doubt my explanation." "I doubt everything, Mr. Dunn, It's how I've survived." She moved to a side table, uncorked a crystal decanter, and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. Taurian brandy, older than his species' presence in the stars. She offered him one. After a hesitation, he accepted. "You've been testing me since I arrived," he said, lifting the glass, but not drinking. His tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. Inera arched a brow. "Oh?" The misplaced codes, the assistant who tried too hard. A staged assassination attempt. He took a small sip, his scarred jaw tightening as the heat touched his tongue. "And last night, the coins. You noticed. I'd be dead long ago if I didn't notice patterns." She studied him over the rim of her glass. "And yet, you still played along. Why?" "Because every test cuts both ways." His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "You weren't just testing my honesty. You were testing my judgment. And leaving those coins out during the reception wasn't a test of whether I'd steal. It was a test of whether I'd leave them exposed. No competent guard would." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. It was one thing for him to pass her games. It was another for him to unravel them so plainly, as though he had seen through her from the beginning. "You knew you were being watched," she said softly. "I assumed I was." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. "Your surveillance system is excellent, but humans can see the infrared shimmer when feeds are active." "I knew your eyes were on me." She blinked. Taurians required technology to detect that spectrum. He had spotted what she thought invisible. "You intrigue me." "Mr. Dunn," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. "Most guards seek to please, to obey. You critique my methods." He set the brandy down, untouched beyond that first sip. "Because they're conventional. And you strike me as anything but conventional, Lady Nyx." For a moment, the air between them felt charged, too close, too raw. No rival house, no council chamber had ever disarmed her like this scarred human with his blunt truths. "You believe me predictable," she said, masking the slip in her composure with a faint smile. "I believe you capable of more than games," he answered. His tone was respectful, but the steel beneath it made her pulse quicken. "If you don't trust me, dismiss me. If you do, then stop wasting both our time." It was bold. It was reckless. It was human. And instead of offense, she felt the sting of respect. "Very well," Inera murmured, extending her hand in the human gesture she knew carried meaning. "Let us dispense with the games." For an instant, surprise flickered across his features. Then his scarred hand clasped hers, firm and unyielding. "Welcome properly to my service, Hank Dunn." The warmth of his grip lingered long after they let go, unsettling her in ways no test could have prepared her for. The morning after their uneasy truce, the corridors of the Azure Empress seemed quieter than usual. The servants bowed lower, their eyes carefully averted, as though they sensed the subtle shift in the house's atmosphere. Inera Nyx sat in her study, reviewing trade manifests projected in pale green light, but her focus kept drifting to the conversation of the night before. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her rivals, not her allies, not even her late father, who had raised her to believe that wealth was armor and suspicion, the only true companion. And yet this human scarred, blunt, unbending had thrown her methods back at her as if they were beneath her. She should have dismissed him for the presumption. Instead, she had clasped his hand. "Send for Mr. Dunn," she instructed her steward. He arrived with his usual composure, armor gleaming, gray eyes steady. He moved like a predator leashed by discipline, every step measured, every glance cataloging exits and sidelines. When he stopped before her desk, he inclined his head in acknowledgement, but did not bow. Inera found the restraint refreshing. "You summoned me, Lady Nyx?" "I did." She rose, her emerald gown whispering around her legs as she paced. I want to know more about you. Beyond your service record, beyond your scars. I'm not in the habit of sharing personal histories with employers. Humor me, she said softly, her eyes narrowing. You've passed every test I devised. That unsettles me. I need to know what kind of man I've hired. He hesitated, then folded his arms across his chest. I work. I protect my clients. I keep my word. Beyond that, I don't see what value my personal life holds for you. The value, she said sharply, is that my life may depend on the man behind the blade. You tell me you're loyal, but to what? Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of pain or perhaps pride. He exhaled slowly, then spoke in that same calm tone that never quite hid the steel beneath. Every month, nearly half of what I earn goes off-world. Epsilon sector. A sanctuary for displaced juveniles. War orphans mostly. Victims of border raids and pirate attacks. Inera froze. The words struck her like an unexpected blow. You send your wealth to alien children? He gave a faint shrug. They need it more than I do. Medicine, education, food, a chance at something better. Her blue fingers curled against the desk. Why? They are not your kin. They are not even your species. Because someone should. His voice was quiet, but each word landed with weight. And because no one else will. She studied him, searching for deceit, for some trace of calculation. But there was none. The truth lay bare in his eyes, stripped of flourish, uncheckable in its simplicity. You contradict everything I have been taught about humans, she said finally. Her tone edged with disbelief. You are known to be tribal, fiercely protective of your own kind, not benefactors to alien orphans. His lips quirked faintly, though it was not quite a smile. Maybe you've been taught the wrong lessons. The silence stretched, heavy, and fragile. For the first time in years, Inera felt unsteady in her own chamber. Her wealth, her power, her carefully constructed defenses, all felt strangely hollow against this revelation. You sacrifice your own comfort for strangers, she murmured. Voluntarily. Comfort's overrated, he replied. Those kids matter. If I can give them one less night of hunger, one more day to learn, then it's worth it. She turned away, pacing toward the viewport, where the stars burned in eternal silence. Her reflection stared back at her, regal and perfect. But for the first time she wondered what that perfection was worth. When she faced him again, her voice was softer, almost reluctant. And you do not consider this a weakness? A drain on your strength? No, Dunn said firmly. It's what keeps me strong. The answer lodged deep within her, unsettling, unfamiliar. It was not loyalty bought with coin. It was not devotion born of fear. It was something rarer, something she had never possessed nor demanded. Respect. Inera Nyx, who had built an empire on suspicion, found herself rattled by the scarred human who guarded her life. He was unlike any treasure she had ever counted, and for the first time, she wondered if she was the one being tested. The Azure Empress broke from its plotted course with a subtle shift of thrusters, veering toward the dusty, desolate moon of Epsilon 9. From the bridge, the view was unremarkable bare ridges of stone, a thin atmosphere, scattered structures, clinging to survival. Yet for Lady Inera Nyx, it felt like uncharted territory. She had not told Dunn the true purpose of the detour, only that her business required it. Still, when the sanctuary came into view, his posture changed. On the viewport, a cluster of modest buildings rose from the red-tinged dust. No elegant spires, no glass domes glowing with wealth. Just repurposed metal structures patched together, with efficiency and care. A ragged banner snapped in the thin wind, painted with crude but hopeful symbols of stars and open hands. Hope Harbor Sanctuary, Dunn said quietly, the first trace of warmth slipping into his voice since she had met him. Inera studied his profile, the scar cutting across his cheek, the way his gray eyes softened as he looked at the screen. That was the man she needed to see in motion, stripped of professional detachment. "I'd like to see it for myself," she said. He turned to her, surprise flickering across his features. "You want to visit? Is that a problem?" "No," he said after a pause. "Just unexpected." The shuttle touched down on a pad of cleared stone. Dust swirled around their boots as they disembarked. Inera's emerald gown seemed absurd here, too fine for the barren landscape, but she carried herself with imperious poise. Children stopped their play to stare, dozens of them, of all colors and species, their faces a mosaic of tragedy and survival. Proxians with ridge-lined foreheads, Centurions with multi-jointed arms, even a few Taurian children, their blue skin duller, their clothes patched thin. But when they saw Dunn, their hesitation melted. They ran to him, calling his name, their voices bright with laughter. Little arms tugged at his hands in armor. One girl climbed boldly onto his shoulder, chattering in a tongue Inera didn't recognize. The hardened soldier's expression eased into something startlingly gentle. He greeted them each by name, ruffling hair, kneeling to listen to their words. Inera had to steady herself. This was the human she had hired? Not just a weapon, but a man these children clearly loved. Got an older woman emerge from the main hall, gray streaking her hair, her face weathered but kind. "Hank," she said warmly, embracing him with familiarity. Then her gaze turned to Inera, her smile tightening with recognition of power. "And you've brought a guest." Dunn straightened. "Director Kelly, may I present Lady Inera Nix, my employer?" The woman's bow was respectful, though cautious. "An honor, Lady Nix. Welcome to Hope Harbor." As they toured the facility, Inera's sharp gaze missed nothing. The halls were plain, the resources stretched thin, but the children were fed, clothed, taught. A classroom buzzed with lessons, ancient terminals humming as young aliens recited mathematics. A medical bay treated injuries with outdated equipment, yet the staff's devotion was unmistakable. It was in the courtyard, however, that her world shifted. A Taurian girl no older than 10 stood apart, her pale blue skin almost silvery, her cropped white hair setting her apart from the flowing manes of status her people prized. The child's eyes burned with unflinching recognition as she stepped forward. "You're here," the girl said in halting standard. The next woman, Director Kelly, tensed. "Mora." "It's all right," Inera said, intrigued by the boldness. She crouched slightly, though even that was a breach of Taurian dignity. "And you are?" "Mora," the girl replied, small fists clenched. "My mother worked in your mines on Taurus Prime. She died when the shaft collapsed." She told her supervisor. The beams were faulty, but he made her keep working. The words struck like a blade. Inera's chest tightened. She remembered the incident, remembered the report that blamed geological instability. 17 lost workers. Compensation packages. Filed and forgotten. "Mora," Kelly began gently, but Inera raised a hand. "Let her speak." "No one would take me in," the child said fiercely. "They said I was tainted by failure. But the humans brought me here. They let me stay. They said I mattered." For once, Inera had no ready reply. Her carefully polished armor of words fractured under the child's gaze. She looked past Mora to Dunn, who stood silent, protective, his eyes steady as though asking, "Now do you see?" Inera swallowed against the sudden dryness in her throat. She had come here to test a man. Instead, she found herself being judged by a child's voice that cut through wealth, power, and pride. As dusk bled across the Epsilon 9 sky, the children sang a song in fractured harmonies, their voices carrying over the dust fields. Inera stood beside Dunn, watching them, her hands clasped tightly before her. For the first time in her life, wealth felt hollow. The coins on her desk, the contracts inked with rival houses, they were nothing compared to this. And she knew then that her human had passed every test, not by refusing temptation, but by showing her a treasure she had never known how to count. The Azure Empress cut through hyperspace, its hull thrumming with steady power. Inara Nyx stood at the vast viewport of her personal quarters, but the stars gave her no comfort. Her mind replayed Mora's words over and over, each syllable a splinter in her composure. My mother told her supervisor the beams were faulty. He made her keep working. It was not just tragedy. It was negligence. Her negligence, if not indeed then in oversight, that Hank Dunn's reflection appeared behind her in the glass, tall and steady as ever. He had said little during their departure from Epsilon 9, but she felt the weight of his gaze, not judging, merely waiting. By the time they reached her coastal estate on Taurian Prime, she had resolved to act. She tore through manifests, internal reports, encrypted files, and what she uncovered hollowed her to the core. Falsified inspections, bribes, ignored requests for reinforcement. The collapse that killed Mora's mother had not been chance. It had been profit placed above lives. And at the center of it was Director Krell Voss, her own operations chief. The fury that followed burned cleaner than fear. She dispatched orders. Voss was to be detained. The inspector who signed fraudulent safety checks was dragged from his villa. Justice, severe and uncompromising, was set in motion. But Voss had anticipated her. 3 days later, the estate's security feeds pulsed with alerts, unscheduled landings, black ships bearing the sigils of House Drevik, House Morale, and House Thaxis, the 3 most powerful rivals to her trade empire. They strode into her council chamber with armed escorts and documentation bearing her forged authorization. And at their side, smiling like a predator who thought the trap closed, was Krell Voss. Inara's steward whispered, shaken, "My lady, they claim an emergency consortium meeting. Your board members are already seated." "A coup," Dunn muttered, hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "They're moving to cut you out." Inara straightened her shoulders, emerald gown sweeping like a banner behind her. Fear clawed at the edges of her composure, but she pressed it down. "Then we'll answer their move." The doors to the council chamber swung wide, and silence fell like a blade. Inara entered first, Dunn a dark shadow at her back. Every rival eye turned toward her. The board sat uneasily, some glancing away in shame, others stiff with guilt. "Lady Nyx," Lord Dravik drawled, rising with false courtesy. "We were told you were detained in the Epsilon sector. Imagine our surprise to see you here." "Clearly," Inara replied coolly, taking her place at the head of the obsidian table. Her gaze cut to Voss. "And imagine my surprise, finding my operations director seated with my enemies." Voss leaned forward, his gray-blue skin dark with smugness. "Your enemies, my lady? Or your saviors? The board deserves stability. You've endangered us with your reckless generosity. 5 million credits to a human-run orphanage? In violation of every Taurian standard of profit and propriety. Have you lost your judgment, or merely your loyalty?" His eyes flicked toward Dunn with calculated malice. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Inara let them simmer for a heartbeat before she struck. "Loyalty," she said softly, "is exactly the matter at hand. To whom, Director Voss, were you loyal when you bribed safety inspectors? When you falsified reports while workers died? On Taurus Prime?" The chamber stilled. "That collapse was an accident," Voss snapped. Inara's fingers danced over her wrist console. Holographic files flared to life above the table. Maintenance requests denied, financial transfers to inspectors. Desperate messages from engineers ignored. Gasps hissed through the board. "You call this an accident?" she demanded, her voice rising. 17 workers, including the mother of a child now orphaned, were sacrificed, she agreed. "And when I sought justice, you fled like a coward. Now you return with rivals, waving false documents, claiming authority you do not possess." Voss surged to his feet, but before he could speak, the chamber doors opened again. Security Chief Turan entered, dragging a trembling figure, a Taurian inspector in plain robes. "This," Inera said, pointing, "is Gerald Mesk, the inspector who signed off on your lies. He has agreed to testify." Panic flickered across Voss's features, the mask slipping. "You can't, I can." Inera cut him off, her voice slicing the air. "And I will." For the first time, the rival lords shifted uneasily. Their gambit was unraveling, the scent of dishonor fouling the air. Taurian culture was ruthless, but even ruthlessness bowed before undeniable evidence. Lord Thaxus cleared his throat. "Perhaps we have been misinformed." "Perhaps," Inera said coldly, "or perhaps you sought to profit from another's treachery. If so, understand this. My empire is not so easily carved." She swept her gaze across the chamber, her white hair gleaming like a blade. "Those who stand with Voss will face the same justice. Those who withdraw now will find forgiveness in silence." One by one, the rivals retreated, muttering excuses, unwilling to bleed for Voss's corruption. Guards closed in, seizing him as he shouted curses. When the chamber emptied, only Inera, Dun, and Turan remained. The weight of what had passed settled over the polished obsidian table. "That," Dun said quietly, "was masterfully done." Inera allowed herself a thin smile. Her pulse was still racing, her composure fragile, but she had turned their coup into ash. "I had an excellent strategist at my back." Dun inclined his head. "Always, Lady Nyx." For the first time, she believed him, not because he was paid to say it, but because his eyes told her he meant it. The council chamber still smelled, faintly of fear and sweat, when the last rival departed. Silence stretched across the obsidian table, broken only by the soft hum of the estate's security shutters sealing into place. Inera Nyx stood at the head of the chamber, spine straight, chin high, but her heart thundered like a drum in her chest. Voss had been dragged away in irons. His evidence, his lies, his coup, it had all collapsed. Yet beneath her victory, unease stirred. She had exposed his treachery, but not his network. And men like Voss did not go quietly. She turned toward the viewport, where the sea crashed against the artificial island that housed her estate. The horizon was serene, deceptive. "Justice has been served," she said aloud, though the words felt brittle. Behind her, Hank Dunn's voice came, steady as always. "Justice for him, but not for those he hurt." She faced him, drawn once again to the scar that traced his jaw, to the way his gray eyes carried no triumph, only measured vigilance. "You mean the orphans." "I mean Mora, her mother. All the others buried under quotas and numbers." His gaze sharpened. "You've won today, Lady Nyx, but what happens tomorrow?" The question lanced deeper than she expected. Taurian nobles did not dwell on tomorrows. They seized, they consumed. They survived. Yet here was her human, forcing her to look beyond profit and rivalry. "I've already established an endowment," she confessed. 5 million credits. Enough to secure Hope Harbor's future. For the first time, she saw his composure falter. Surprise softened his features, and beneath it, gratitude. "That's more than generous." "It isn't generosity," she corrected, her voice firm but quiet. "It is responsibility. My company's negligence created some of those orphans. Supporting them is a debt repaid." He studied her, and she found herself wishing desperately to know what he saw. A ruthless magnate feigning compassion? Or a woman finally daring to change? Maybe, he said slowly, you're learning the real measure of treasure. The words struck her deeper than any rival's barb. For years, she had surrounded herself with jewels, ships, estates. But none of it had ever left her feeling as raw, as unsettled, as alive as the human who stood before her. Hank, she said softly. His name tasted unfamiliar on her tongue, intimate in a way Torian custom forbade. He looked startled for only a breath, then warmed with something more dangerous than respect, affection. I set coins before you, expecting theft, she murmured. I set traps before you, expecting failure. And all along, the true treasure was standing before me. The silence that followed was heavy, intimate. She raised her hand, blue fingers trembling slightly, and traced the scar along his cheek. It should have been unthinkable. It felt inevitable. Dunn caught her hand gently, his touch firm yet careful, as though even now he feared to overstep. In Torian society, he said, voice low, this would be forbiddance. And in human society? This, he said, leaning closer, would be long overdue. Their kiss shattered protocol. Warmth flooded through her, not the heat of ambition or conquest, but something rarer, connection, trust. When they parted, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. Inera whispered, the board will scream at this. They will call me weak. They will say I have let a human corrupt me. Let them, Dunn replied with the faint, crooked smile she had come to anticipate. They've already seen what happens when they mistake compassion for weakness. She laughed softly, a sound so rare it startled even her. For a moment, the weight of empire slipped from her shoulders, replaced by something lighter, but the moment shattered with a chime from her. Private console. A message blinked, stripped of origin codes. She opened it, and the words spilled across the hologram like venom. Your human pet has made you weak. Lady Nyx, Hope Harbor is only the beginning. Everything you value will be stripped away before I am finished. Perhaps then you'll understand the true cost of justice. Inera's blood ran cold. Beside her, Dunn's posture hardened, hand brushing the pistol at his hip. It's Voss, he said grimly. Or someone backing him. Inera's jaw tightened. For years, she had believed her treasures were safe, locked behind vaults and contracts. Now she understood the truth. The treasures worth protecting were far more vulnerable. A scarred human who defied her expectations. A sanctuary of orphans who carried her people's shame. She lifted her chin, fire burning in her chest. Then they've made their final mistake. Because Lady Inera Nyx was no longer testing her bodyguard. She was standing beside him. And for the first time, she knew her wrath would be wielded not for profit, but for something infinitely rarer. Justice.